Today we are looking at how to make our subject more paintable, or how to see as an artist, especially with working from photographs. Photographs are great tools to use, but they can become too dominant in our painting. We can end up just copying a photograph. But even painting outside, we want to just see our subject outside as a place to start, and feel free as an artist to push things one way or the other to suggest a mood or atmosphere, again, as opposed to just copying what we see. And photographs are great tools to use, but they should just be an idea, a place to start a composition, not an end result. I do not want to just end up copying from a reference, or from a still life, or from a figure. There has to be something more to it than that. So there's a few things I want to think about first, and I have a couple of images here from Greece. This is a scene of a few boats on the beach house up here. Kind of nice lighting, nice contrast. There's a lot going on. My other scene is also busy, really busy. This has way too much going on. And of course, I do want to reduce detail, make it more simple, but something like this, the idea is, where do you start? And I could start from the idea that, maybe this just isn't paintable. Maybe there's nothing here I want to say, but I really like kind of the water, the boats stacking on top of each other or next to each other. There's a lot going on, a lot of values and shapes. So how do I make this paintable? But let's go back to the first photograph. This one, a little bit easier, but still there's a lot going on. And I want to think of a few things first. I want to think about what is my main focus here, what is my center of interest. And not that every painting has to have a center of interest. Sometimes the center of interest can be just a mood in a painting, or just the light. But generally, most of my paintings have a focal point. And that's where I want the viewer to look first. Then after that, after having or identifying a focal point, I want to think about how I want to move the viewer's eye around the painting. I'm not just going to take everything that's given to me and just copy it. And I do like the idea of these lines of the boats here. Let me change color. These boats kind of pointing this way to the path leading up the stairs, winding around to the house. And then some light shapes here also pointing down. So there's some angles and lines and shapes that kind of help move me, or move the viewer into the composition, and helps their eye travel around. And that's what you want. You don't want a viewer to look at something and their eye just skims across a bunch of detail because there's nowhere to rest, and they just exit the painting. But if I can line things up, move things around, simplify things to have their eye move and follow shapes, lines, contrasts, to wind around the painting, maybe up here, back around, and then back down and out the front again. So a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to pick and choose from. The big thing, though, is to simplify. So again, if this is my focal point, that's probably where I'm going to do the most detail. And everything else out from that is going to be more simplified. I'm going to really reduce detail, reduce the contrast of dark and light, so that when someone looks at my painting, they look here first. So I will have maybe the darkest dark here, lightest light, somewhere around there. I'll have a line, I'll emphasize this line of the beach, so that viewer kind of enters the painting at the bottom, goes to the boats, hangs there a while because there's so much going on, and then follows some stronger, smaller, more subtle contrast or lines or angles that kind of move the viewer's eye around. So that means, really, what do I do with all this stuff? I do like some of this stuff up here. I like the depth behind the hill, the vertical trees, but you have to make decisions about what's important and what's not. And this back in here, as much as I like it, just has nothing to do with this. So I'm gonna eliminate it to some degree, kind of downplay it. And the first thing I'm going to do is zoom in, make my focal point bigger. Because again, that stuff on the left upper corner just isn't important. So I'm going to get rid of that. That makes the boats bigger. It makes the house, which is kind of a secondary interest, a little bit more important and bigger. And then I want to think about things I want to get rid of. There's several things here. I don't like this. I think it draws too much of attention. And I definitely don't like this, that bright red shape down at the bottom. Too much clutter here. I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff and reduce it to just maybe simple shadows and light areas. And then I need to soften edges. Too many darks in these tree trunks back in here. Too many sharp edges in the trees and in the shadows. I really want the viewer to see the boats first, maybe pick up the line of the shoreline here leading to the boats, and then following these lines and some bits of strong contrast going up the wall or the walkway to the house. So here's what I'm going to do first of all. And you can see I've gotten rid of the thing that was there, the red buoy that was down below, and all the clutter that was there. So when I look at the photograph there, got rid of that stuff. And that really helps, emphasizing this line a bit more, simplifying all this stuff, getting rid of some of the things up in here as well. Simplifying, get rid of clutter. You can see all the clutter in there. Even this background wall here, I'm just going to get rid of that to emphasize more of the boats than the house. Then I need to think about, I want my sharpest edges around my focal point. Around in here is where I want my sharpest edges between dark and light. Also where I want the most contrast. So I'll emphasize the darks here, these darks down in here, and the real bright lights on the boat. And that also means I'll downplay some of the contrast that's back in here, the value of the dark trunks, some of these dark accents around in here, the dark accents of the tree. I'll downplay those so that the boats stand out more. And here's my final result. Emphasize a little bit more of the color on the tree, but I'm essentially losing the edges between the strong darks and lights in the background, and even in the tree up in here, and some of the edges that are in the shadow, like the base of the wall there, and any edges within this shadow area. So get rid of all the sharp edges inside of shadows. My sharpest edge will be the real bright light against the real dark here and back in here. So right around in here I'll have the sharpest edges, darkest darks, lightest lights. And also I added some stronger color. This orange buoy, I emphasized a stronger blue, blue-green. And they don't even have to represent anything. They can be spots of color for color's sake, just to punch the color in my focal point. And I might, block in the trees in the background way up in here, shadows on the hillside, fairly carefully, simple, but carefully, and then take either a palette knife or a bigger brush, usually a synthetic or a sable brush, and just drag over it, just to lose the edges. Sometimes I will block it in carefully and scrape it with a palette knife. That'll thin the paint. And then come back and add the lights with a bigger brush, and then drag a softer brush over that, just to knock down edges. And it kind of mutes the color a little bit, softens edges, softens color. That way, again, the boats will stand out quite a bit. So going from this, which has a lot of clutter, to, well, let's not worry about that stage. So from here to here. And softening everything makes the lights on the walkway, the stairs leading up to the building stand out a bit more. My eye hits these highlights first on the boat, really light, then these going this way, coming up here and then picking up that. And there's some darker accents up in there. So kind of guiding the viewer's eye to where I wanted them to go, and de-emphasizing things that I don't think are all that important. Now the next one, also in Greece, way too much going on in the background. Again, I really like this kind of clutter of three large boats there. And the strong contrast of the light or white boats against this dark water. I like the color of the Aegean Sea there. It was very strong blue and very dark. Kind of a phthalo blue almost. But I need to get rid of all the clutter. And I could do a couple of things. I could go ahead and just make, big dark trees back behind the boats and just have a simple dark green, blue-green shape that makes the white boat stand out. But I also kind of want to paint what's there. So I need to really de-emphasize the detail and the sharp edges as well as the stronger color. So the first thing I would do is crop it. Again, zoom in. Getting rid of some of the background, but still having a lot of the background there. Way too much detail. So what I want to do here is de-emphasize the background by, again, I could simplify the shapes, just a simple dark background back in here and a slightly lighter dark for the buildings. And again, probably paint it not too carefully, but get these big shapes blocked in. Spend a bit more time on the background than what I want to have at the end of the painting. And then with the palette knife, scrape it. Sometimes I'll scrape it and I'll let that paint dry, kind of a scraped version like this, looking kind of scraped. Softening all the edges. Also, when you scrape color, it knocks it down. It mutes it a bit because you're pulling some of the colors together, which can cause kind of a mutedness. Then I can come back when it's dry and kind of dry brush a few lights, like a light there, a few spots of lighter, maybe a little bit stronger color, but nothing that'll compete with the boats. But the scraped paint will make everything sink to the background. But I'll also have to lighten the shadows. I've lightened all of these shadows a lot more than what they are in the reference. Because if we look at the reference, you can see these darks up in here, back in there, in here. They're just as dark as the darks in the foreground. And I don't want that. I want to eliminate the strong dark contrast in the background. So a slightly muted violet that's a lot lighter than the darks up front. And that's going to push this stuff back in the background, have less contrast in the background, so less attention to it. And then by pulling a big brush over the background and or taking a palette knife and just scraping it. And then again with the option of coming back and dragging some dry brush in, maybe to get a few lights or a few areas of different color like this yellow awning or the green awning back there or the kind of reddish roof, as long as it doesn't compete with the foreground. Also the idea of the softer edges from the scraping and dragging a big brush over it. And by big brush, I use a lot of synthetic brushes. Rosemary brushes are really good. But sometimes just some cheap synthetic brushes from Michaels or Hobby Lobby maybe 1 inch long or a little bit bigger. Something without much strength to it, not a stiff brush like a bristle brush, and just dragging over it. Cleaning the brush off, dragging it over again. Some edges in the background a little bit softer than other edges, but none of them as hard as what's in front. Like I would have a real sharp edge right here. Sharp edges on some of the windows, not all of them. Sharp edges on some of the doors. Sharp edge here, maybe here. So a few sharp edges that kind of come and go in the foreground. I don't want a continuous one single hard edge line kind of outlining the boat. I want it to kind of come and go. That's a real important sharp edge right there and right here, and maybe a sharp edge there on these cast shadows. So you want to kind of come and go with the sharp edges even in the foreground, but definitely sharper, and the darks being a lot darker. So now I'm keeping the viewer from focusing on anything in the background, and their focus is going to be right in here because that's where the strongest color is, the most contrast, darkest dark, lightest light. And then they can meander back, follow maybe the shadow pattern back in here, picking up a couple of these little light areas and then winding around and back down again. So think through what you want to say in your painting. Now what I'm doing here in Photoshop, I'm doing this in Photoshop, by the way, which I pay a monthly fee for. I don't know what it is anymore, $10 a month. I use Photoshop mostly for critiquing students' work. So I don't do this a lot when I paint, but I do some. I'll take the photograph and put it in Photoshop and kind of rework it like this. But I do this mostly with small color studies. So if this is going to be like a 16 by 24, I'll do maybe a 6 by 8 or a 6 by 9, I think would be the equivalent proportion, and work out the colors, the edges, the scraping, or maybe just something even a little bit bigger, but see it as a practice painting where I'm just trying to work out how I'm going to simplify this. What am I going to do? Where am I going to crop? Where am I going to lose edges? Less contrast, lighter darks in the background, and so on. So, and it's not always easy. And usually I have to do 3 or 4 takes on something to find the right idea of what I want to get across in my painting. And hopefully it's never just copy the photograph. Not only would that be boring, it'd just take forever to paint something like this. So if that was helpful, let me know. Leave some comments. Let me know what you think. Because a lot of people might not like this view. This blurry view in the background. But let me know what you think. And if you like it, leave a like and subscribe. And if you want more about kind of pushing the idea of getting away from a reference or thinking of your subject as just a place to start, watch this next video, which is how to make color decisions in your landscape compositions.